Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 630.
WMAL.
6:37 on the Morning Majority, and the Washington Post had quite a take on Fast and Furious, the ATF operation in which the ATF agents let gun sellers sell illegally to gun runners who take them to Mexico. And I guess the original idea was something along the lines of, we're going to keep track of these, maybe get some higher ups. But as we've pointed out on the show, that's a little different than letting some coke or marijuana walk and then following it to the source, because in this case, 2 guns that were allowed to go across the border by the ATF ended up at the scene of the murder of a border agent. So this is under investigation now, and the Washington Post writes an editorial about it and decides that they know who the real culprit is, and it's the NRA.
Yes, that's the first thing that came to my mind. NRA. Yeah.
And
I was thinking ATF, maybe Justice Department.
Right. No. We will explain this to you because we've got David Keene, president of the NRA, on the phone. How you doing, David?
Just fine, thank you.
Good to talk to you. So I imagine you've read the Washington Post editorial.
That was tortured reasoning, I have to say. Now, of course, it's perfectly true that no matter what happens with guns or accidents or shootings or the like, the Washington Post manages over the years to find some way to blame it on the NRA, but the tortured reasoning of this editorial was basically that, yeah, it's too bad that the ATF folks violated the law, but, they had to do that because they didn't have enough laws of their own, and so therefore breaking the law was excusable. In fact, what happened was outrageous, and the Post, is in a very delicate position on this because after the federal government urged secretly that gun dealers along the border sell guns to cartel members and others, sales that, by the way, the dealers objected to making.
Right.
The Washington Post then named some of those dealers as major criminals in this whole enterprise, and as an excuse for what? More gun control.
Of course.
Not realizing, or perhaps looking past the fact, that the reason that they were doing this was that they were being not just urged to do it, but ordered to do it by a government that has control over whether or not their licenses to deal in firearms are renewed. So the whole scandal is outrageous, and the fact is that, as the ATF whistleblowers have said before Congress and elsewhere, the ATF had no way of tracing these guns once they crossed the border. So what they did was they went out and forced legitimate gun dealers to sell guns to criminals, which then crossed the border into Mexico. Then the administration, after that, argued that because these guns were going to Mexico, what we needed was more anti-gun laws in the United States. And I'm not saying that was their initial motive.
But
it was more incompetence than anything else. But it was the whole thing has been an outrage.
But what do you think their motive was? I mean, there's been speculation that there was a nefarious reason, which essentially was to show that guns are being sold in the United States and being taken over the border, and they're being used in crimes and used by the drug cartels to show that we have to have some kind of more of a crackdown on guns in the United States. Would you believe in that line of reasoning?
Well, conspiracy theories are easy to come up with, but when you're dealing with government bureaucrats, in sort of an enthusiasm for the mission and a degree of incompetence that sometimes is hard to fathom when you're outside the agency, is just as easy to motive. It's hard to get into somebody's head. It's hard to find out or to come to a conclusion as to why they did this. But what they did was outrageous. They had over 200 agents working on this. They spent millions of dollars. They had gun dealers send thousands of guns into Mexico, and they've gotten no prosecutions.
My journalistic instincts tell me that when something doesn't make a lot of sense, that there generally is some missing fact that we haven't quite gotten yet, and I believe that is the case. But I want to ask you about the acting director. Now, there are many people calling for his head. The Justice Department, I think, would like to see this guy sort of be the sacrificial lamb. He seems to be resisting those efforts and says he very much wants to talk about this. What do you think is going on there?
Well, given the resources and the personnel that went into this project, it is inconceivable that someone much higher up than the acting director of the ATF didn't know about it and authorize it. And I think what he's telegraphing and again, it's hard to say what somebody's thinking, but it seems that what he's telegraphing is, don't throw me under the bus, because there are other people that are responsible or as responsible for this as I was.
And if you had to make a guess, who do you think those other people are?
Well, it had to go either to higher-ups in the Justice Department or to the White House, because this is a major operation that cost millions of dollars, and it played into all of the, as you say, all of the charges and suspicions and allegations that the administration was making about American gun dealers and the availability of U.S.-made weapons in Mexico.
And what do you draw about the fact that apparently, although he's been invited, this acting director's been invited to testify on Capitol Hill, the Justice Department has not yet released him to do that?
Well, I don't think they want him to testify, because I don't think that, from what I've read and from what I've seen and heard, I don't think he's willing to take the blame all on himself. And they've, of course, maintained from the beginning that they didn't know. The Justice Department didn't know anything about it. The President of the United States says this is a big government. I don't know what's going on. They would very much like to wrap the whole thing up, say it was an out-of-control acting director of BATF, and move on. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, and it doesn't look like he wants to let them move on at his own expense.
Outside of Fast and Furious, how would you grade this administration so far when it comes to the Second Amendment?
I would grade them very, very low. We at the NRA have been fearful of this administration from the beginning, as you know, I think. Even prior to his presidency and prior to his election to the Senate, President Obama was very involved with foundations and others that are very anti-gun. His comments during the campaign, when he was elected president, were triggered a great deal of fear among Second Amendment supporters and gun owners around the country. And since that time, he has tried, and his administration has tried in various ways to increase restrictions on gun ownership and gun use in this country. They've failed, but that's not for want of trying nor for want of a desire to do it. And it's our fear that if Barack Obama has a second term, the shackles will be off, if you will, and he'll try to do things that he hasn't been able to accomplish thus far. So we grade him as a very anti-gun president.
Well, and he doesn't have to actually pass anything, as this administration has shown. It's more than happy to do things through regulation. Where would you guys be looking for that to come from?
That's exactly right. There are two things, just the two most obvious things that he can do, other than what he and his administration are doing, which is the harassment of gun dealers and the like through regulation administration. The two things that we fear most are, one, an appointment to the Supreme Court that could change the balance in the two cases that have affected gun rights over the last few years. And if you change that balance, remember what the court has said is that American citizens do have a right, individually, under the Second Amendment, to keep and bear arms, to use them for self-defense and the like. But that right, like other rights, is subject to reasonable regulation. Now, the administration, like the city of Chicago, feels that reasonable regulation means basically confiscation of guns. The courts won't stand for that, but if you have another liberal vote to switch the majority on the Supreme Court, you can expect that this right that has now been acknowledged will be severely restricted. Secondly, during the Bush administration, I was a delegate to the UN Small Arms Conference, and at that time, the United Nations wasn't able to do anything to restrict American citizens' ownership and use of firearms because the State Department, the White House, and UN Ambassador John Bolton made clear that this country would accept nothing that restricted its citizens' rights under the Second Amendment of the Constitution.
All right, David.
Obama administration has already said that they don't particularly stand by that statement.
David, good to have you on the program. Thanks for coming up.
My
We appreciate
pleasure.
it.